Hey, what's up? It's Matt, and TISHLIS. 4. Let's roll. First thing, where does dust come from? So I remember one day I was just looking at dust on my floor in my room and thinking, wow, there is so much of this and it's so disgusting, and wait, where does it even come from? Turns out it just builds up naturally from a bunch of different sources. Like there are fibers from clothes and bedding and furniture that fall off when we use them. It also builds up from dead skin cells, pets or bugs inside your house, and dirt and air particles from outside. Besides being annoying and dirty, I learned that dust can also be dangerous. According to an NPR article, if you live near a toxic waste site, then your dust can be really dangerous because an estimated 2/3 of dust is from outside. Though I feel like living near a toxic waste site has to be dangerous in general, regardless of what percentage of your dust comes from outside. Pesticides have also been found in dust, and dust can enter our lungs through the air, and children are also just putting everything in their mouth, so just clean your dust and don't live near a toxic waste site, and you'll be fine. Okay, second thing, why do red eyes happen in photos? The basic summary of this is that in certain conditions, a camera's flash lights up the blood vessels in our eyes, which is reflected out and captured by the camera as red eyes. But let's break this down. Everything that we see is made up of different combinations of light, which then enters the eye and is captured by a part of our eye called the retina. The retina capturing this light and then converting it to messages which can be understood by our brain is what allows us to see. Now, the pupil determines how much light is let in. When it's really bright out, the pupil shrinks so that less light is let in. If it didn't shrink, there would just be too much light entering our eyes for us to see well. And similarly, when we are in a dark environment, the pupil expands so that we're able to let in enough light for us to see at all. You've probably seen cameras do this too. In bright environments, they adjust to let in less light, and in dark environments, they adjust to let in more. So now let's talk about the cameras. When we are using a flash with a camera, we would only use a flash in a low light environment, in an environment where our pupils have already expanded to let in more light. Now, the flash happens so quickly that our already expanded pupils don't have the time to adjust to the light and shrink. In that moment, which is the same moment that the camera takes the picture, much more light enters our eye than the retina is capable of capturing. So instead of all the light being absorbed, some of it is reflected back. And it reflects back through red blood vessels in our retina, which causes the reflected back light to look red. It's like what would happen if we shined a white flashlight behind a red transparent sheet of paper. The light you'd then look at would be tinted red. So basically, the red eye effect is the camera capturing lit up blood vessels in our eyes, which happens when more light hits our retina than it can absorb. Now, a couple of other things can influence the red eye effect. Because the red eye effect is based off reflected back light, if the camera and flash are physically separated from each other, then the reflection will be at a different angle and you'll be able to look directly at the camera without it having red eyes. But if they aren't physically separated and they're together like this, if you don't look directly at the camera, then you shouldn't have a red eye effect. Some cameras will also use a red eye setting, where they do a couple of flashes before the actual main flash of the picture, and these couple flashes are meant to start adjusting your pupil to the brighter light so that they shrink more before the main flash happens and a normal amount of light is let into your eyes. And finally, people with darker skin and darker eye color are naturally less likely to exhibit strong red eye effects. And I should also point out that even though the red eye effect can be enhanced or mitigated by the color of your eye, your iris, that alone will not ever cause a red eye effect. Okay, number 3, what is the difference between the eggs that we eat and the eggs that chickens lay? I was actually pretty surprised to learn that there isn't one, so we're done here. Number 4, liquids don't necessarily— No, don't worry, I'm kidding, there is a difference. Okay, the egg thing. Healthy hens will produce eggs whether or not there is a male rooster to mate with them, the same way that women ovulate even if they're not with a potential partner. If a rooster fertilizes the hen's egg, then you will have a chicken embryo. But if one doesn't, then there will be just an egg which will never have the capacity to develop life. Those are what we typically consume, unfertilized eggs from hens who have not yet mated. This seems pretty obvious with hindsight, but when we, or at least I, think of eggs, I always think of cute little creatures like with life popping out of them. We often forget that females do just normally produce unfertilized eggs whether or not there is a mate. Now, believe it or not, fertilized eggs are sometimes sold, even though you don't have a chance of eating a baby chicken. All eggs in the US must be refrigerated before being sold, and this refrigeration process stops any growth from an embryo that there might be. Also, the interiors of all the eggs we eat have to be inspected, and this inspection would show whether or not there is any chicken growth. So whether the egg that you're eating was at one point fertilized or not, you'll be fine either way. Having learned all of this though, I feel like it would be much easier to just not sell fertilized eggs, considering we wouldn't be risking anything. And considering how polarized opinions are about abortion in the US, I'm actually pretty surprised that a bigger deal hasn't been made out of the fact that we are potentially killing, selling, and eating baby chickens. Maybe I shouldn't have said. Number 4, liquids don't necessarily freeze at their freezing point. So I always thought that once liquids hit their freezing point, they froze, because why else would we call it a freezing point? But there are actually other conditions that need to be met for liquids to freeze, and if they aren't, this can result in liquids getting much colder than they naturally would. So let's look at water and ice. In ice, the water molecules are arranged into this crystal lattice structure because they don't have enough energy to overcome the naturally attractive forces between water molecules. This lattice is the defining feature of ice. It's what makes it a stable solid. But before all the water molecules come together and make this lattice, we need to have some central structure around which it can be built, a starting point for its construction. This starting point is called a seed crystal, and it's what really matters when we look at water freezing. See, seed crystals actually require a bit of outside energy to be formed at all. This means that regardless of how cold it is, if there isn't any outside energy to create this initial seed crystal, a lattice structure and ice will not form. Now, it really doesn't take a lot of external energy to create that seed crystal. Oftentimes, a slight bump or just a natural rumble from your freezer will do it. And also, the colder the water molecules are, the less energy they need to create that seed crystal. But still, under the right conditions, you can get a lot of water that is colder than its freezing point, so then inserting just a little bit of energy will create that seed crystal, and everything else around it will freeze like you see in this video. By the way, we would describe a liquid that is colder than its freezing point as supercooled, which is important to know for the last thing, which is, what is the difference between freezing rain, snow, sleet, and hail? Okay, so I don't know the specific differences between any of these types of precipitation, and I want to. All these different types of precipitation are basically due to the fact that clouds and the air between them and the ground all have lots of different temperatures and conditions that affect it, so let's learn about those. Okay, so if we're doing this, we should also do a recap of just rain, which we get when atmospheric water vapor condenses and then just becomes heavy enough to fall down to the ground. Okay, freezing rain is also pretty simple. It's just totally normal rain, except the air and the ground that it falls through and hits are below freezing, so when it hits the ground, it freezes. Snow is water that has frozen near clouds and then falls to the ground as crystals. Similar to how ice needs a seed crystal to begin, snow also needs a central nucleating structure to form, usually a grain of sand or dirt. As more and more water freezes around this established crystal structure, it becomes heavy enough to fall to the ground, and then does. Now, as long as temperature is around or below freezing for most of the snow's descent, it will fall and hit the ground. Which means that even if the surface temperature is above freezing, snow can still hit the ground if most of the air in its descent was below. Sleet is like a combination of rain and snow, and it forms when there is a warm layer of air sandwiched between two colder layers of air. Snow is formed in this first layer of cold air, and then as it gets to this warm layer, it partially melts, and then goes into another cold layer and sort of refreezes into this rain-snow hybrid. This usually falls to Earth in the form of a pellet, but yeah, sleet is a rain-snow hybrid created by snow partially melting and then refreezing. Lastly, hail is pretty interesting. Hail is basically ice pellets that form when supercooled water below its freezing point, repeatedly freezes around dust or air particles. First, clouds that are associated with storms tend to have warm, buoyant air, which means these clouds rise up to a place in the atmosphere cold enough that the water around them becomes supercooled. And then inside an especially turbulent cloud, the dust and air particles are blown up and down by the wind. And every time they're blown around, they hit some of that supercooled water, which freezes around them. This happens to them over and over and over again, with more water freezing onto them until they eventually become these heavy, heavy pellets that can fight the wind that's blowing them all around and fall down to Earth. And that's it. Cool. If you want to watch the other TISHLIS videos I made, you can click on this playlist right here and enjoy that adventure. Otherwise, subscribe, like the video, yeah, and thanks. By the way, it's crazy how difficult explaining things succinctly can be. I spent at least 2 hours trying to figure out how best to explain that red eye thing and the water freezing thing, just because it's hard to do it in few words. So I hope it made sense. Thanks. I'll see you later.